Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the English Daily Book Summary YouTube channel. In order to not stop learning, listen to an English book summary every day for free.
Sigmund Freud. Psychopathology of Everyday Life. It's a familiar feeling for all of us. You've just forgotten a name, misplaced your keys, or said something that came out a little off. Annoying, but no big deal, right? Just one of those silly, everyday slips to brush off as stress or distraction made manifest. But what if that little mistake wasn't so innocent? What if it was actually a clue? Your psyche's subtle way of revealing what's really going on underneath the surface. Freud's seminal work popularised the idea that your unconscious is always at play, quietly shaping your behaviour in unexpected ways. Thoughts you're not fully aware of, unresolved tensions, unspoken fears, even uncomfortable desires, often find their way bubbling up in the form of everyday errors. A forgotten name, a slip of the tongue, a missed appointment. These moments can reveal more about your inner world than you might realise. Here's the best part. You don't need to be a licensed psychologist to start decoding them. Simply paying closer attention to your own behaviour, especially the moments you'd otherwise ignore, can open up a greater understanding of yourself, and this understanding can be hugely empowering. In this blink, we'll cover the most important points of Freud's classic: how the trivial mistakes can carry non-trivial meaning, how your unconscious influences your day-to-day life, why forgetfulness is rarely random, how slips of the tongue can divulge deeper truths, and how simple self-observation can unlock profound insights into who you are. Ready to dive into your own psyche? Then let's begin. On the trivial. We all make those everyday errors, stumbling over a simple sentence, putting our phone down in the obscurest of places, or calling a colleague by the wrong name. Most of the time we laugh them off as accidents, or beat ourselves up later on at our apparent mindlessness. But the truth is, these accidents aren't so accidental. Freud's classic theory flips our casual attitude toward mistakes on its head. Everyday errors are far from meaningless. They're not mental hiccups. They're little clues, subtle signs that something is bubbling beneath the surface. According to Freud, there's no such thing as a purely trivial or random mistake. These seemingly small moments are instead an expression of internal conflict, repressed feelings, or unconscious thoughts trying to sneak past our mental radar. Say someone forgets a word while quoting a poem. Not wholly unreasonable, right? Maybe, but maybe not. Freud gives the example of a young man who forgot the Latin word aliquis while reciting Virgil. Through a free association exercise with Freud in which he linked aliquis with liquid and blood, it became clear the young man was experiencing anxiety about a potential pregnancy, something he hadn't consciously acknowledged. That kind of forgetting isn't just forgetfulness. It's a psychological compromise. Part of the mind tries to bring something up, while another part pushes it down. These errors tend to share a few features. They're usually brief, familiar actions gone slightly awry, and we often dismiss them with a shrug. A surprising further commonality is that we don't recognize any emotional motivation behind these mental missteps precisely because they're unconscious. That's why we're tempted to just explain them away. There's also a kind of logic to these moments. They're motivated, but in a hidden way. The visible mistake, what you did or didn't do, is the manifest content, while the real reason behind it, the emotional or psychological truth, is the latent content. And that's the real insight. Even the most trivial mistake might be a message from a part of your mind you're not fully aware of. In essence, Freud argues that those everyday errors aren't purely accidental. Behind every little mistake might be a bigger hidden truth bursting to make itself known. On the unconscious. Have you ever left a borrowed book unreturned to a friend, forgotten to forward an email to a coworker, or found yourself humming a song you haven't thought about in ages? These things seem inconsequential, even random, but they're likely anything but. In fact, they could be quiet signals from that mysterious part of your mind you're not fully aware or in control of, the unconscious. Freud's contribution here is this: our unconscious plays a far bigger role in daily life than we might think. Hidden thoughts, emotions, and conflicts, especially the exact ones we'd prefer not to face, often steer our actions without us even realizing it. We aren't talking about dramatic moments of obviously bizarre behavior. These unconscious expressions instead are tucked into normal, everyday routines. A simple forgotten task or a misplaced object can all carry meaning if we know where to look. Let's return to the examples we started with. Maybe that book we keep forgetting to return reveals an unconscious desire to hold on to something that isn't ours. Similarly, it might not be forgetfulness causing us to overlook a coworker in an email thread. Maybe there's something about this individual that stirs up discomfort or reluctance. And it doesn't stop there. Repeatedly avoiding tasks assigned by a boss or requested by a spouse might seem like carelessness at first, but can also convey subtle resistance, a quiet protest driven by emotions we're not fully cognizant of. Then there are the physical mishaps. These clumsy moments often carry symbolic weight. Old superstitions of bad luck from spilling salt or walking under a ladder can feel oddly resonant. Our actions, even the unintentional ones, can reflect internal states trying to make themselves manifest. Even that tune stuck in your head, it might not be random. We often hum, whistle, or mumble songs that, if we pay attention to the lyrics, capture something profound about what's going on in our inner world. The unconscious has a canny way of seeping into the backing track. What's fascinating is that we don't need to be fully conscious for our minds to express something real. Although easy to dismiss, these everyday moments are like memos from our psyche. If we slow down and pay attention, they start to reveal the deeper stories we're carrying, just out of view. On forgetting. Let's dive a little deeper into the phenomenon of forgetting. When was the last time you forgot something? Whether an appointment, bill, birthday, name, or otherwise. Last week? Yesterday? A few hours ago? It happens. But sometimes, with some reflection, our forgetfulness reveals itself to be a little too specific, a little too well-timed. What if, in line with Freud's theory, our forgetting isn't forgetting at all? What if it really is our mind's quiet way of saying, let's not go there right now? Freud posited that forgetting frequently serves a psychological purpose. We can't simply chalk these instances up to being overwhelmed or scatterbrained. Sometimes forgetting is a subtle form of self-protection, a way of avoiding discomfort, emotional conflict, or a particular stressor. Our brain isn't dropping the ball, it's very intentionally choosing not to pick it up. Names are probably the most common case. Forgetting someone's name might help you temporarily forget the anxiety, hurt, or jealousy you associate with them. You might even forget where they work or where you last saw them. Here, your mind isn't forgetting details so much as avoiding distress. Freud shares an example from his own life, a recurring tendency to forget to pay bills. Often, this forgetfulness was tied to underlying resentment, whether toward a freeloading relative or an institution like the government demanding money. Sound familiar? What about forgetting to do someone a favour? The person waiting will usually jump to the right and, telling conclusion, if it was a genuine priority, it wouldn't have slipped your mind. An interesting nuance to Freud's theory is that sometimes our brains don't block the actual pain point itself, but forget something adjacent. If we're unable to ignore what's really bothering us, our mind might divert its protective mechanism to something tangentially connected to it instead. In either case, when forgetfulness shows up, especially if oddly specific or well-timed, it might not be just a mental slip. More often, it's an unconscious protective strategy shaped by our psyche to help us avoid discomfort, dodge emotional tension, or sidestep what we're not ready to confront. What appears as carelessness on the surface is often a carefully concealed signal that there's something else brewing below. On slips. Now, let's turn our attention to those awkward slips of the tongue. You've probably had the experience of meaning to say one thing, but something altogether different tumbles out. Perhaps you intended to say bread and butter, and somehow said bed and butter instead. In the moment, it can feel like a random brain blip or bubble of nervous energy. But what if we entertain Freud's idea that they're actually something more revealing? These little moments, then, these little slips of the tongue, misread phrases or accidental word swaps, aren't just quirks. They're a sneak peek into your inner world. In other words, when your mouth slips, it might be your mind speaking. Take that bed and butter example. It might sound silly, but if the guilty party is preoccupied with something else, say intimacy or desire, it makes perfect sense that their unconscious mind would hijack a neutral phrase and add a loaded word. Interestingly, these kinds of slips aren't confined to speaking alone. They show up when we read, write, or even need to sign our signature. Someone repeatedly misreading particularly pretty as particularly petty might have some under-the-surface irritation they haven't addressed. And calling your husband your brother or your aunt your mother, maybe that's not just mixing up family titles, but reflecting unresolved feelings we'd rather set aside. Following this train of thought, it isn't hard to extrapolate what an unsigned cheque or important legal document might imply. It's easy, and perhaps more comfortable, to explain such instances as a phonetic error or proof of mental fatigue. But Freud would argue these slips can't be explained away by mere mechanics. Instead, they reflect internal truths we're actively trying not to acknowledge, desires we're repressing, thoughts we're avoiding, feelings we're not ready to face. In sum, slips of language are rarely meaningless errors. More likely, they're a subtle but telling expression of your unconscious mind. Whether it's a wrong word, a repeated misreading, or a verbal mash-up that hits a little too close to home, these moments communicate thoughts and feelings that the conscious mind actively tries to keep in check. Far from being random, these slips are clear signals that the deepest parts of our psyche are always trying to speak. Self-observation, a psychological superpower. So we've talked about how everyday mistakes can reveal hidden thoughts, but there's another layer to this. You don't need a Freud to start uncovering them. One of the most powerful tools for understanding your unconscious mind is readily available: your own attention. By becoming aware of these minor errors and observing them with curiosity instead of ambivalence, you can slowly start to decode what your psyche is seemingly so desperate to express. In this way, you can turn even the smallest slip into greater self-knowledge. Freud's assertion that nothing in our inner life is random or accidental wasn't just a groundbreaking contribution to theory, it offered a practical tool. Freud certainly walked the talk in this respect, famously turning his analytical tools on himself, and much to their displeasure, his friends and family, exploring his own slips and forgettings. He treated them not as flukes, but as clues. As a result, he found something emotionally charged, a desire, a discomfort, a disturbance he hadn't consciously noticed. Nothing in the mind, he believed, happens by pure chance. It starts with curiosity. If you keep forgetting to call someone back, maybe it's not forgetfulness but resistance or hesitation. If you mix up names, skip over words when reading, or leave out a signature, take a moment to ask what might be being avoided. What does that action or inaction protect you from feeling or confronting? Remember, even the most casual slip can be meaningful. These moments are often driven by psychic material that's been pushed out of our consciousness but finds a way to rise to the surface nonetheless. And we're actually already pretty good at spotting this kind of thing in others, picking up on patterns or drawing telling conclusions. The next step is to turn that same accurate assessment inward. Of course, there's a line to be drawn, and self-observation doesn't mean overthinking or obsessing over every move. Even a little awareness and reflection can go a long way. Because through this lens, clear insight is available to us in every moment. We needn't save profound introspection for the big life-changing events. They can just as readily come in the almost unforgettable everyday moments. But if you're willing to listen, you'll find that your psyche is always saying something. In this blink to Psychopathology of Everyday Life by Sigmund Freud, you've learned that little everyday mistakes are rarely random blips. Instead, they often carry profound meaning. Beneath the surface, your unconscious is constantly sculpting your behaviour, quietly revealing itself through moments you might typically ignore. These small errors often communicate unresolved conflicts, hidden emotions, or thoughts you haven't fully faced. When you begin to see them not as mistakes, but as clues, it becomes clear that your psyche is always speaking, even when you're not consciously listening. The upside is you don't need special training to tune in. You just need a little curiosity and a willingness to look closer. The more attention you pay to the trivial things, the more deeply you'll start to understand yourself. And there's something empowering in that, knowing that the most meaningful self-discovery may only be a minor mistake away. Okay, that's it for this blink. We hope you enjoyed it. If you can, please take the time to leave us a rating. We always appreciate your feedback. And we'll see you in the next blink.